I think especially these days, it's very easy to just sit back and like look at your phone and feel like, oh, I got everything I need. I know how everything works. And you have to go out and have these humbling experiences to truly know like what you're made of.
That is Laura Carney. I'm Amy Guth, and this is Unconventional, the podcast about people who are doing things very much their own way. Laura Carney is a writer and magazine copy editor in New York. She's been published by The Washington Post, The Associated Press, The Hill, Runner's World, Good Housekeeping, all kinds of places. And I'm so pleased to welcome her to the podcast to talk about an unconventional adventure that came together called My Father's List. Laura, welcome. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, let's dive right into this. For those who may not be familiar, talk a little bit about this list and the role that it's having in your life.
Sure. It's interesting, actually, because I keep thinking about when was the last time I saw you? And it was like right before I had this amazing discovery. It was like 8 months before, I think.
Ooh,
So you were like kind of right there at the beginning where I was this like distracted driving awareness advocate. Like I believe she even drove me from a dinner like to the meeting that I was going to in Chicago. And a few months after that, I got married. And a big part of why I had become a distracted driving advocate was because my father was killed by a distracted driver when he was 54 and I was 25. And I had just through fate at my job at Good Housekeeping as a copy editor, an article had come across my desk about distracted driving. So for about 13 years there, I just had not made the connection at all that there had maybe been some kind of human behavior that could have led to his tragic death. So I got very invested in a very practical, logical way and was trying to help people who had also experienced that loss. And at that conference during the same weekend when I met Amy, I just was learning all about, the statistics and what causes these deaths and how we can prevent them and how telling our story really makes a difference. And, for a little more background, as I said, I was working at Good Housekeeping. So I was a journalist and I'm sitting there at this meeting, hearing people talk about telling their stories, thinking, oh, wait, I kind of know how to do that. Maybe I can help with this. And I really felt somewhat unsatisfied though, because I just felt like this feels like a really quick hit, almost like a PSA or something, almost like you might feel about a Lifetime movie or something. Like I'm going to show you this really tragic thing that happened. And I kept thinking, what is it about almost like public health crises, like phenomenon, like similar to what we're experiencing right now with COVID? What is it about that really makes people think about it differently and take it to heart? And what kept coming to my mind was the movie Philadelphia, because I remember being a teenager and having, experiencing like people express homophobia left and right. And then when that movie came out, all of a sudden we all love Tom Hanks. So it became, these are real people, who go through this. So I was sort of, I think, unconsciously searching for a way that I could, as a writer, both pay tribute to my dad, but also try to find a way to spread awareness of what had killed him. So I could, potentially help other people not experience the same kind of tragedy. And another big part of why I became an advocate when I did was because I was about to get married and I was feeling a lot of dread about how I might feel in that moment when I walked down the aisle and he wasn't physically there with me. So I guess it was maybe about 6 months after the wedding, my brother, just by pure coincidence, maybe not, I don't know, we always seem to do everything at the same time, got married in the same year, had just bought a new house. We were going up to visit it. And he's like, oh yeah, we found something when we were unpacking, but I thought you might want to look at this. And so as my sister-in-law, Jamie, brought out this little bag and it had these 3 pieces of notebook paper folded up in it. And it turned out that my dad had written this list of just all the things he wanted to accomplish in his life. And there are 60 things on it. And it was one of those, like, I don't want to call it like a flashbulb moment, but it was maybe it's sort of the flip side of when I found out he had died, because it's like there are all these moments in your life that you just remember very crisply forever. And in that case, it was like devastating. But in this case, it was like, oh, there was like this moment of wonder, like, wow, what a cool thing that he did this. And he never told us about it. And then also the fact that I immediately knew that I needed to finish it. Like it wasn't like people have asked me before, how did you even decide to take that on? And it does seem like something that is kind of foolish and overwhelming to take on, but it was like a total emotional gut instinct that I knew I had to finish this for him. And my husband said simultaneously, I always say like, thank God, because if he hadn't, we'd have some trouble. But he simultaneously said, this is your book. This is what you can write about and finish. And this will help solve your problem of educating people about this. And it occurred to me then like, yeah, that's right, because this is how he lived his life. And this is a story about how adventurous he was. And so, I mean, that's really how it started. That was my first instinct with it. Of course, I think people in general, we kind of go through life thinking we know everything, like, oh, I'm okay. I mean, just in general, not someone who knows they're going through something difficult, but I had no idea how much I really did need that list. Like, I didn't know how much I needed to learn both about myself and about the way I was living. And even that, I still had a lot of grief that was unresolved, that was holding me back from feeling true joy in my life. So it's been like just this incredible life-changing journey. And that was November 2016. So we're now going into 5 years of this.
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on something that I'm curious to ask you about, and that is how this process has changed your relationship to grief and changed the grieving process for you.
What I used to believe about grief was that it's this like, and I think all grief is like this, but I think there's an added element to it if it's traumatic and sudden loss, which is that, oh God, I didn't know this could happen to me. Like, I know this is a thing that happens, but I didn't know it could happen to me. And because of that part of it, it's very scary. And I think in order to navigate that, when it happens, your brain does something that sort of protects you from how scary what's happening is. And it's like, okay, I just have to get through today. I just have to get through tomorrow. And I mean, I learned that at 25, so I learned it very young. I mean, I don't know if that served me in any way in the rest of my life, but that's just how it was. And after it was over, it was just like, okay, now I have to be a young person. Now I have to like live my life. And I was a lot less optimistic and hopeful than most people my age, understandably, which really didn't align with my character at all. But that's just how it was. And I think the way I was handling it from that point forward was just, okay, this tragic, horrible thing happened that I don't know how to make sense of or resolve. And it's really now questioning my faith. But at the same time, I'm supposed to be young and hopeful and optimistic. So I think I sort of divided into two selves, where there was the true self that was still dealing with this thing on the inside. And then there was the self I presented to the world, which was, no, damn it, I'm going to become a journalist in New York. Like, this isn't going to stop me, like almost like resentful of the thing that happened. And it became almost like a dirty secret to me. And that really, I don't think could have lasted me forever living like that, because by the time I had another major life event happen with getting married, which was 13 years later. So I did go on a long time that way. It was a big wake up call. It was just, I think it's almost like I snapped back into my body or something. And I had to feel these very present emotions about this decision I was making in my life. And it occurred to me, I'm really unhappy. I'm really unfulfilled. I'm pretending to be this person I wanted to be, but there's something missing. And I really didn't know what it was. So I think grief can be like that for people who have a hard time both being brave enough to face what happened. And that's in no way knocking those people, because if it's something like this, a violent death, it's very, very scary. But I also think we don't really have a lot of language in society to help people deal with that, because it seems to me, I mean, I don't really love it when people generalize like, oh, it's so much worse today than it ever was before, because I don't think that's true. But it does seem to me that the commercialization of our world is making it so that these terrible things happen and then we just sort of move on the next day. And it's like, as more and more terrible, unthinkable things keep happening to people, it's like, well, now we're used to that happening. And it's like, well, this is just inevitable. This is just life. And it really dehumanizes people in a way. So I think that was part of, I don't blame myself for having reacted the way that I did. It was just the only way I knew how to cope with what was going on. But I do think when my dad's list arrived, the fact that this was written by a man in 1978, the year I was born, I think that has a lot to do with its healing power, because that wasn't the world he was living in. But, interestingly enough, he wrote a book too around that time. I think it was his college thesis. He was an American Studies major. And it was about a similar subject. It was about, I actually have it right here because my wonderful husband published it for me this Christmas. So we're going to put it on Amazon. So my dad's going to be like an officially published author now, but it's called The Why Generation in a Why Not World. and it has 13 essays in it. And what my dad was talking about in the book was how, he grew up, he was a teenager in the 60s, and he grew up in a time where things were really shifting, both politically and in general. And people were questioning everything. They were questioning everything they'd ever been told about this is who we are as Americans, and this is how we live. And there was a major gap between the generations. And by the time he himself was thinking about getting married and settling down and doing what everyone was telling him he was supposed to do, he was starting to notice just this general apathy with people his age who before that time were like revolutionary. And now it's the 70s and everything is going to hell. And there's, I only know this based on what I've seen on TV, but there's like Summer of Sam and murders and people are like, oh, this country sucks and Carter isn't helping. So I feel like what was happening was he's just like, God, no one's passionate anymore. Like no one is putting thought into their choices. And really, I think that's what that book was about. So I do think the fact that he even took it upon himself to sit down and write a list of this is what I want to do with my life, that speaks to like a very hopeful, optimistic mindset, almost like an innocent mindset of that time period. So I think that had a lot to do with why all of a sudden the way I'm looking at grief is so incredibly different, because I don't look at life anymore in the sense of like, what have I lost and how am I going to get past this? And I'm afraid of losing more. Instead, I look at it in the sense of, look at all I have, look at all I've been given. I'm going to be given so much more. And what can I give to other people? And it's a real like philosophical switch that happened for me, I guess, in about year 2 of list checking.
That's so interesting. So when you found the list, there were 60 things on it. How many of them had been completed?
He completed 5, which was how we knew that he kept it his whole life. And it was like written in 2 different colors pen. So, that's how we know we checked it off at different times. And he had written one as having failed at.
What did he fail at?
It was pay back my dad $1,000 plus interest. It was kind of sad if you think about it, what that means.
Had his father died? What made it final? Yeah.
That's how you failed it. You can't pay someone back if they're not here.
Sure.
Although if you think about it, that's kind of what I'm doing.
Yeah, right. In your way you are. So for those who have not been following along, and I'll put links in the show notes, but head to Instagram/myfatherslist. That's the place to find all of this and to keep up with all this. But for those who have not been following along, talk a little bit about what is on the list and some of the things that you've done. What did you do first?
Well, I was already a runner. I just finished the New York Marathon right before my wedding. So my eyes were immediately drawn to the run 10 miles straight list item. And I had already actually signed up for the LA Marathon because when I found out that Trump won the presidency, I was disappointed. And this wonderful group I had joined on Facebook said, oh, you should turn your disappointment into something positive. So I signed up to run the LA Marathon for Girls on the Run. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to focus on like putting this energy towards helping a group of people that I'm concerned might struggle the most during this time. And I thought, okay, well, if I do the whole thing, then I could just run 10 miles of it and I could, kind of run the rest of it, which is what I normally did. And I was shocked to find that my best friend who lives in LA said, like, I found out basically that you could do it. You could split it 2 people. You didn't have to do the whole thing. And she said, well, I'll do it with you. And that actually ended up starting a trend, which has happened with each list item, which, I wonder if my dad had actually really tried to finish all of it and actually told people about it, because nobody but my mom knew the list even existed. I wonder if he might have had an easier time actually doing these things, because to my surprise, almost with every list item, I've had someone volunteer their time or effort to help me with it. And it's been this incredible, just life enriching experience with, as far as like, because a lot of them require expertise and skills that I just haven't developed in life. And if I had to go and pay people to teach me like every time, that would have been a fortune. And instead, what I'm mostly spending my money on is, I work a little bit differently now than I used to. I have lots of freelance jobs instead of the full-time job at Good Housekeeping, but that affords me the time to write. And a lot of my money goes to trips. The Super Bowl I went to in 2020 was $5,000. And that was like for the worst seat in the house. And, my dad loves sports. So a lot of them are like that. It's sporting events. I've been to like every major sporting event you could think of that is like the best of the best you'd want to go to, and somehow enjoyed it. I wasn't really a sports fan before that, but I still learned something from those too. And then as far as, athletic activities I've done myself, I learned how to sail by myself, which is interesting because I found like this tiny little boat that you could learn how to sail in, which I didn't even know existed before that. There's a tennis list item. I played golf. And then there's the running, the surfing I jumped out of an airplane I did it on TV because, sometimes I'll try to like combine the list items if I can, just to, get a few out of the way. And, I went horseback riding in New Mexico. It's funny, when I first started doing this, I used to say to my husband, oh, well, let's do the horseback riding in New Mexico. Like, I want to make this picturesque so I can write about it later. And he's like, you could like go somewhere a few miles from here and go horseback riding. You do realize this.
There are horses.
And it's like the further along I've gone in the list, it's like, oh, okay. Like, I don't have to like go to all these different places really, but it was very exciting when I first started out. So I would do things like that. I went to St. Thomas, I went to New Orleans, went to London, went to San Diego. I think there are about 8 different travel destinations on it. But, the thing that has really taught me the most about my dad, I think, though, is there's a lot of sweeter items on it too. Like, make my spouse feel happy, healthy, beautiful, and young all the days of her life. And, how many people get married and actually go into it with this intention? Do you know what I mean? It's almost like we get married. I mean, I hate to generalize, but I do think it is a tendency that people get married and are kind of like, what's in it for me, which by the way, I did say when my husband proposed, but it was a joke. But I mean, a marriage isn't about that. It's not what's in it for me. It's I agree to support you for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? So little things like that, to have learned that he wanted to do those things, have been really touching and educational to me. And there's silly ones too, like grow a watermelon.
Well, the skydiving one, you did that one right before I did skydiving, because I gave you a shout out like on camera right before I leapt out of a plane. But I felt better about doing it because I was like, well, she did it and it seemed okay for her. I can do this. I'm a human being too. I got this. Yeah,
I was so honored that you did that, because you're such like a role model for me, and you're such a badass that I thought, God, I affected her. Like, what's happening?
Bless you. That's very nice of you to say. Well, what of these were difficult? Were there ones that you were like, oh man, that's going to suck. That's going to be hard.
I thought golf was going to be very hard. I had absolutely no interest in doing it. And it wasn't just golf. It was golf in the 70s a few times. And I'm sure, I don't know why this one entered my head immediately, but like, I imagine if your listeners are anything like me and have similar tastes, they're probably like, their brains are going to sleep right now. But honestly, I just thought, this is a boring sport. It's for old men, old white men. This is going to be terrible. I mean, playing golf in the 70s a few times, that's almost Tiger Woods level golf. So that means my dad thought he was awesome at this. And then to my surprise, I took a few lessons over at the, God, what do they even call it? Do they call it the batting cages? I feel like that's not right.
Driving range.
Driving range. Thank you. See, I don't even remember what it's called. With this wonderful old man who was funny and great at it, and a great teacher. And it turned out I wasn't bad. Like, I actually really enjoyed it. I think I was going through something that was making me angsty at one of my jobs at the time. And it felt good to like get my aggressions out with swinging this metal club. And then it was really wonderful, because the only person in my life I could think of who was good at golf, who could potentially help me with this, was my stepdad. And he and I had never really gotten along too well. Like, we're just such different people. We'd never seen eye to eye, but having this like bonding experience with him on a golf course, which we did like 3 times, once in San Diego, which was also a list item. It put me in this position where I had to be vulnerable, and I had to ask this person who I had always sort of been odds with for help. And then that meant he had to be vulnerable, because when you ask someone to teach you something, they're put in a position of like, oh, okay, I have a lot of power right now in this situation and influence. And I don't remember a time my whole life where I actively asked him to teach me something, and it was like a healing experience. I really think it was. Now it's a couple years later and our relationship is so much better. And I kept thinking how much my dad would just be smiling about that. Like, he just would be so happy about it.
Well, I kind of wonder though, like, are there moments where you've felt very connected to your dad more than others in this, or felt like a big serendipity, or just kind of a, whoa, that's an unexplainable thing that just happened?
Yeah, I mean, to the point where I'm very woo woo now. Like I'm very, I mean, I was already an intuitive person. I already would pick up on things, like my dad was a singer. So there's so many songs I associate with him. So if a song came on at just the right time on the radio, and then he died on August 8th. So there was a little while there where I would just see the number 88 repeating, which could have been him. Also could have been my brain trying to like comprehend this terrible thing that happened. So it's just showing me that. But all of a sudden I was getting these like just direct, like almost like a 2 or 3 word sentence from him in my head all of a sudden that I knew had to be him because it was worded in such a way that I would never say it like that. Like I had an article published in the Washington Post, and what I heard was changing history in like this very proud way. And I thought, oh, okay. It was like Field of Dreams, if you've seen that movie. Like if you
Yeah.
build it, they will come. And or if I'm editing a story at work about him, and I don't like a change that's being made, I heard just play ball, like it's like things like that. The most profound one, I think, was as I was finishing those 10 miles, when I was checking off that first list item, run 10 miles straight, I was getting like really embarrassed towards the end because I didn't think I was going to make it. And there were a lot of things my dad did when he was alive that embarrassed me and I didn't want to be associated with. And it was sort of like, like people are like, oh, how cool, how sweet you would do this as a tribute to your dad. But what they don't often know is that I also had a very complicated relationship with him. So this has really resolved a lot of that as well. And what it's mainly done is it has helped me as I'm accepting these things about him that I didn't always agree with or understand. I'm also learning to accept those same things in myself. And it's such a freeing experience because it is like bringing to the surface all of these good qualities I have that were also qualities that he had. And I think sometimes if you're like resisting being like a parent, you're kind of denying yourself that opportunity because they actually, like, you probably did inherit some great stuff too that is maybe not being expressed because you have some kind of resentment towards this person. But anyway, towards the end of that 10-mile thing, I'm thinking like, oh my God, like people always thought you couldn't do things or you couldn't finish things. And now here I am, this like total idiot out here, thinking I can do what you couldn't do. I'm not going to do it. Like you couldn't do it. I'm totally embarrassing both of us. Like, what were you thinking? Like blaming it on him, essentially, this poor guy who is now not even with us. And what I heard in my head was your life, your choices. And it like happened, like it was like over and over again. And I mean, I'm sure you've experienced with running and exercise, you just go to a different place mentally, like, I mean, I'm still a runner now and I've been doing it for like 8 years. And it's really, I mean, that really has changed my life because it's so therapeutic and it puts me in touch with my true self. And it puts me like, it leaves me open for insight to come through that wouldn't come through in any other way. And I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that had to be him because, that's who he was. He was saying, hey, I didn't make you do this. You took this on yourself. I just provided it and it showed up at the right time. But if you're going to make a choice in your life, you really have to own that. And I don't know. It's been a very interesting experience for me to start living that way because I think, ironically, or maybe fittingly, it's a big part of how he died, because I think we're living in such a fast-paced world now with our devices and, not just phones, we have Alexa and we have everything else and Amazon, and we can kind of do things in a split second without even recognizing, oh, that was a conscious choice I just made. So to take these things that this guy wanted to do in 78 and actually like learn how to do them and also have enough openness to let things come to me, whether it's a person who wants to help or, me just believing that a total failure is actually going to end up being the most best possible thing that could have happened. It has taken a lot of conscious thought. It's taken a lot of me being present and saying, no, I'm choosing this.
And you mentioned the book. This is all coming together
Oh, yeah.
in one story. Tell me about that.
Well, from the beginning, I really wanted to write a book about this experience because I don't know. It's interesting because like I said, when I started doing it, it really was, I thought, well, I need to help people to be aware that this was a person's life and that life mattered. But it's really shifted to like, well, this is my life and my life matters. And I think it took me looking through the world through the eyes of a 29-year-old man in 1978 for me to truly understand just these subtle ways in which I was letting myself be objectified as a 40-something-year-old woman. in our time, which I think, similar to the not being aware of making choices thing, like we just become accustomed to, like we just kind of accept. So I think the book in a lot of ways is more my story because it's just me. Like you see me change incredibly throughout it with, I describe my experiences with the list items, but also my relationships in my life, which have all really changed drastically since I set out to do this in good ways.
What came to mind when you say the ways in which I was being objectified as a 40-something woman? What were the most profound on that in that bucket?
Well, I mean, like golf is a good example. I didn't think I would enjoy that just because I thought it was for men. I thought this is not for me. Sailing was an interesting one because, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I found this thing at this place in San Diego that was an aquatic center, and the sailboats they had were actually for children. They were like the size of a bathtub, but you can get in them, and it's a whole 2-day class, and it was amazing. And I mean, of course, I shouldn't say of course, there you go, I said it again, but except for one other woman, every person in that class was male. And they were saying things to me, go, why isn't your husband here? And it's like, well, I just went to the Super Bowl, and this is, I think I was saving for the Super Bowl at the time. It's like, well, this is an expensive thing for us, because he was there on the trip. He just wasn't there taking the lesson. And who cares? Like I could take a sailing lesson by myself. And I remember the second day of it, like the tide was a little too high, and our teacher took us out and really regretted it because she's like, I shouldn't have brought you out. And right before that, there was a guy in the class who was like, hey, you haven't told us what we do if we capsize. And she's like, let's not bring that juju here. She's like, but here's what you do. And so then, of course, like 2 of us capsized, and I was one of them. And after it was over, I couldn't get over how many women in my life were saying, weren't you terrified? Like, weren't you scared? And I mean, also, I should add, this was happening during a regatta. So there were like boats just going, like racing each other, like all through the bay. This is Mission Bay in San Diego. And she had said, okay, if they call it turtling, if your boat turtles, if it turns upside down, just wave your arm and just wait for me. And I have a life jacket on, I'm fine. And then like a nice man came over, and he started trying to help me up, like onto his boat. I mean, which was fine. He was just like a nice Samaritan. But my teacher, who was female, kind of came over in her motorboat, was like, no, it's okay, I got it. Because she doesn't know who he is, And then she pulled me back up onto it through great effort because I had almost no upper body strength at the time. And then another guy who had capsized, he came on too. And I mean, I'm thinking like, this is a great adventure. This is incredible. I can't believe I just did that and survived it. And I mean, that's just all part of it. But yeah, the women in my life were like, God, weren't you terrified? That sounds horrible. And it was such a like a paradox for me because I'm like, well, God, I jumped out of the plane on TV. I met Jimmy Carter and talked to him and shook his hand. And it's sort of like what was happening was these things that we tell ourselves because we're women. And I don't think we deliberately do this. I think we're more socialized to do this. We tell ourselves, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. That's not safe for me. Or I won't be good at that. And it's a shame. I mean, I'm just as, I don't want to use the word guilty, but I'm just as culpable of those things as anybody. In fact, I wonder if maybe I was more so because I made myself this sort of people pleasing, timid person for most of my adult life. And I've just sort of become now the opposite of that just through experience because, okay, yeah, sure. It was a little bit scary when I was in that water, but now I have like 54 adventures I'm going on that each one is building upon the next. And just my logical, factual life experience, which, as a journalist, I love, is teaching me, no, actually, you can survive this. And all of your thoughts about what you think this is, they are probably not correct. It's going to be actually something else completely. So that's mainly what I mean when I say my experience of life was objectified, even though I didn't know that.
That's very powerful to me. I mean, I feel like that was my experience skydiving, that on the other side of it, I felt like, oh, in an instant, I left fear behind that I didn't know that I had. And I felt like I had a lot of people saying to me, I could never do that. I was like, I wasn't super excited. I was terrified too, but I decided that I needed to. And I think it was very powerful to me how many people were saying, I could never. when in fact you can. You may not want to, but you can do it. And I think we cut ourselves off at the pass in many ways just with the language that we use.
And the other thing that's been so strange to me, honestly, is how much I've heard that from so many of these list items. And not only I could never, but also people start attributing all of these qualities to me as though I'm just this like, rock star superhero person. And you're so amazing and you're so inspiring. And, I get this all the time. And I'm thinking like, do you know me? Like I'm still this deep inside. I'm still the same person I've always been. I've always thought of myself as quite like a regular girl next door kind of person who is more comfortable writing or just behind the scenes than in front of a camera. So, unless I have something to say, then it's a little bit different, I guess. But it was very surprising to me how quickly a person's perception of me had changed when I had always been much more meek and retiring. And it's like, well, I'm doing this just because I believe in it. I'm making myself do these things because I love this person. And I have a vision of what could be if I live this out. And yeah, it's really, it's upset a lot of my probably deeply held beliefs for a long time. But the good part about that, though, is it's made me now a much more open person so that I approach any challenge just knowing, okay, like this is figure outable. Like Diana Nyad. Like I've found all these famous role models and even just like historic role models or writers along the way to inspire me, like generally people who have just kind of lived unconventionally. And she was a big one because I think she was almost 70 when she swam from Cuba to Florida. And she was on like this interview with Oprah, and she like nobody thought she could do that. And I think she had attempted it maybe 6 times and had failed each time. And she said that her motto was just find a way, like I will find it. And that's been a big thing for me since I learned that a couple years ago, that really, you can, if you believe that you can do something and it's that important to you, you will find a way to do it.
I love that so much. And that kind of leads me to something I'm so curious about. If some of these things are, I mean, none of them are just like, I called a place, I made a reservation. I mean, I suppose some of them are, but like meeting Jimmy Carter, you don't just text the guy and go, hey, well, listen, I'm doing this thing. I need to meet you to check this off this list. Did the process of pulling some of these list items together change the way you approach that very thing, that find a way?
I mean, it's different with each one, but I mean, you actually, it's interesting. You would be surprised. Some things are as simple as you just call the person. And I mean, for the Super Bowl, I found an NFL website that was selling Super Bowl tickets, and it was one guy, and I called like a year in advance. And then I just paid that guy. There are so many things in life that we think are so challenging to make happen. And it's just like the legend behind the thing that does that to us. But really, if you just look it up, oh, this is actually super easy to do. They just want my money. I'll just give it to them. But with Jimmy Carter, yeah. I mean, maybe it's my journalism background or just I'm generally very persistent. But I think probably the thing that helped with that the most is just that I'm also very open and very aware that, I mean, I was this way before, but I'm really this way now, that I'm never the only person creating my life. I'm never the only I mean, and it's interesting to bring that up in reference to him, because he gave a Sunday school lesson when we were down there. And that was the theme of the lesson. It was, you are always co-creating your life with something bigger than you. And don't think like you have to listen to what your spouse says or what your parents say or what your kids say. Like they're generally not very good at choosing what your life is supposed to be. But at the same time, don't feel alone and believe that you're just doing it all by yourself, because you're not. There's always a greater force at work, whatever you might believe in, that is guiding you. And that has really stuck with me. And I mean, that happened over and over again with that experience. It only even came to light because I was doing an Inside Edition interview in the early days of the list. And a man from Alabama emailed me and he's like, hey, I saw your interview and I hear you want to talk with the president. If any president will do, Jimmy Carter still teaches Sunday school every weekend, most weekends of the year in Plains, Georgia. And I just kind of decided, well, yeah, I guess that will do, because I'm not that invested in going to the White House and meeting Trump. And Jimmy Carter was president in 1978 when my dad wrote this. He's the one he would have been talking about. So we went down there, but there were just like, gosh, there were so many mishaps on that trip. Like we barely made our flight, which almost never happens, because even though I tend to be not the most timely person in the world. Anytime I do anything with my husband, he's like an hour early. And I don't even remember at this point what happened that day, but we were like running for it. Just little things here and there that just kept going wrong. But I had just watched like all this footage of Jimmy Carter that week, all these documentaries, and it explained how much went wrong, like in his presidency and in his experience as a politician, and how he always showed mercy to everybody. So at that point in time, I was like, okay, I'm going to be like Jimmy Carter. Like, I'm just going to show mercy for everything that goes wrong. And when we got there, we did get to see his library. We got to have a private tour of his museum, but that was only because I had like directly emailed the museum and I had said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. And I find like a well-written letter, especially with something like this that's so heartfelt, people tend to respond well to it. Not everybody will. I mean, I had to write the museum a few times. The first person was like, just didn't respond. And of course, months later was like, oh, he's too busy to do this. But if you just go down the list and try a few different people, you're going to find someone who is interested. So we got the tour, we left, and I really was like dying to climb Stone Mountain because it was like something my dad had taken pictures of himself doing. Stephen wasn't like super into that because he was already exhausted from the morning, but he agreed to do it. And it's sort of like if we hadn't taken that spontaneous adventure, we wouldn't have gotten to the hotel exactly at the same time as Carter's biographer. We wouldn't have had like a 3-hour conversation with him in the parking lot. I would have had nothing to talk about with him if I hadn't been watching Jimmy Carter documentaries all week. And he wouldn't have set it up with Carter secretly for us to talk to him on Sunday, which, we had been told over and over again, he doesn't do conversations. So it's sort of like, if, I don't know, the persistence is part of it. The belief that it's going to work out like against all odds is part of it. But then there's also the openness, it's also the, like, how are you with other people, and how are you in situations where you might be stressed, but you also just kind of want to enjoy the moment? Because climbing Stone Mountain really was that. It was just, we want to enjoy this experience. And meeting Art Milnes in that parking lot, it was just like, wow, this guy's really cool. And we're really tired, but I want to talk to him and learn more for 3 hours. So, and it's interesting to think about that because that's so how my dad was. Like the whole time we were talking to him, I kept thinking, my dad is so here right now because that's who he was. He just was always so present and always up for an intelligent conversation with anyone.
I love that climbing Stone Mountain shifted the tide on that. So what's next? What's left on the list?
Well, you asked what the hardest ones are. And I mean, the one I didn't really mention was writing a book, which is technically a list item. But I mean, now I feel like, this counts, this book that my dad wrote that my husband just published on Amazon for me, self-published, because the list item is write and have a few novels published. And one of them will be mine, although it's more of a memoir than a novel. So that has been very long. The process of that has been long, but I think we're pretty close to selling it right now. And what else this year? I have to write to the Pope, which I've seriously been putting off because even though I have a few things in place that I think will make him write back, because I've made a few connections with people, I want it to be perfect. like I want the letter to be just right. So correspond with the Pope. So that means I have to write a letter that he writes back to. But he does do.
Oh, it's specifically correspond. It's not just write to the Pope.
Oh yeah, but he does do that, and it's me. It's like as I've gone on this journey, one thing I've also learned how to do is, how can I put this? Follow my subconscious. So like sometimes if I'm writing a chapter about the list in a book and I'm suddenly like, I have to watch all 3 Indiana Jones movies and my husband will just be like, what is happening? Like, this is research. And I'll just say, I can't explain it. My subconscious told me I needed to do this. There must be something in one of these movies you're shaking your head because you're a writer, so you understand, but there must be something that is leading me, because I'm always feeling that way. This is leading me to something else. So, I mean, like a couple of weeks ago, an article, it was an editorial, appeared in the New York Times of this man who is gay and wrote a book about being Catholic and being gay, and wrote a letter to the Pope, and the Pope wrote back. So, that person, of course, I immediately DM'd on Instagram to thank him for showing that to me, because I thought, oh, cool, he does write back, and I've done a lot of that too. Like I was talking before about a well-crafted letter, but it's also, you can really write to anybody at any time. And it's sort of like, you have to be open to that too, and be open to maybe looking like an idiot, because some people won't respond or won't be nice. But I find 95% of the time people are really nice and open to it. So at least I have some hope that that might actually work out, because it did for like a regular person. What else do I have? Okay, so tennis. I have to beat a number one seed in a tennis tournament, which is
Oh,
another
wow.
one that has been like a straggler, because I actually got injured doing that on my first day doing it, and ended up getting foot surgery. And it just, man, what a detour that was. I just thought that was when I reached my lowest point with it, because I thought there's no way this was a good idea. Like I can't even walk anymore, much less run. But of course, that probably was the thing that taught me the most and that I grew the most from that experience. But my husband he helped me check off own a tennis court by buying me a ping pong table for my birthday last year, which, because it was just the beginning of the pandemic, we decided that counted. So, even life is setting up situations where things count more than they would have otherwise. So we're going to have a ping pong championship, because he too had like an Achilles injury. So it's like we're both injured athletes, but we're going to do it that way. And he's really, really fucking good at ping pong. I hope I finally use my curse word well.
Yeah, nice.
And then I want to start a charitable fund. And my goal this whole time has been, I want to start it in my dad's name. And I wanted to have 75% or so of the proceeds from the book be funneled through it. And then originally I was going to have it just be going to distracted driving causes, but I've decided since that I'd like it to go to all of the pet causes of everyone who's helped me. And there's a
Mm.
real pay it forward element of that, I think, because they have generously given me their time and energy and love. And not only would I be paying it forward to them, but also it's their dreams and their goals. And any person now who buys a book is part of it. Now they're also a list helper. I just hope I don't have to start a website where like they list all of their causes, because then it would just be like this never ending game of dominoes or something.
Right.
Like I can't give to every single one.
So, what happens when the list is finished? When the book is finished and the list?
It's a good question. I've been asked that a couple times, and I don't know that I've come up with a satisfactory answer yet. Like sometimes people say, "Are you going to be sad?" And I can't say that I will be sad, because it's not like this list is my dad. It's not like I've been able to put off grieving because I have this thing and it's a surrogate, or like that's not how it is. If anything, it's actually forced me to let go, because with every list item, it's like my friend Art, the one I was just telling you about, who helped me with Jimmy Carter. He's like, I feel like you just leave a little more baggage behind with each one that you do, and it's really true. So the way I look at it is, since I wrote my own list in the fourth year of it, and I've already started checking off my own list, that is what happens. That going forward, that's how I'm living my life, is intentionally and consciously, and going after things I care about and that I want to do, which really anybody can do. You can, like I said, it's your life, it's your choices. You can make that choice to do what you want. And honestly, we don't know how long this pandemic's going to go on. We thought we were done, still not done. And it has been, having this project, even though it has slowed down considerably, because I had to postpone Vienna and Berlin, that's still happening in April, but it was going to happen this month. Having this has been such an incredible balm for me with getting through this time, because I think what is so upsetting and depressing and frustrating for most people is like our regular lives have been upset and we don't know what to do now, and when are they going to come back. And I had already been on this journey of learning, no, I'm making my life as I go, and whatever shows up is here to help me. Which I know sounds, sometimes people say that sounds inconsiderate or insensitive, like, oh, how can you say someone dying is there to help you? But I mean, I'm at a point of acceptance with the way my father died, that in no way means I accept the way he died. I've always been doing this to raise awareness of that, so that people are more conscious when they drive. But I also just hope that people will be inspired to be more conscious with how they live, because I think they're both intricately tied to each other.
I'm so curious about your list that you made for yourself, because I can't imagine. I mean, the kind of things that you've done with my father's list are the kind of things that mostly populate people's bucket list. So the idea of like doing a list of things that you haven't already done seems like a lot. I mean, how big is that list? What's on that list? I'm so curious about that.
I mean, maybe you get desensitized to it after after a while, things that are more unique to me. Like, I mean, I'm at like 70 things now. I'm kind of getting out of hand, but things like I'd like to visit every national park. I'd like to hike the entire Appalachian Trail. Things like I'd love to visit Joseph Campbell's tomb in Hawaii, because he's my favorite. just every time something occurs to me, like, well, that would be cool. Or, like this is something I've always been invested in and interested in. And I want to have that be a goal of mine in my life that I'll do it. I'll just put it on there. They're mostly just kind of adventures, but they're also, I think probably I'm just like, they talk about like adrenaline junkies. I think I'm just like an awe junkie now, or like a wonder junkie. Cause I just want to have these, that sounds so ridiculous, but I just want to have these life experiences where you're just like, like, oh, like I can't believe this incredible, like I'm in the Sistine Chapel and I can't believe I'm here and I'm seeing this. And I've had so many of those now, thanks to my father, that I'm just finally now getting it, that like that's what being alive is. So if it's anything that's like that, especially if I can experience with another person, I mean, not to knock doing it yourself, because I also have lots of things on there that are just for me. I mean, when I go to Vienna and Berlin, my dad's listening. I'm deliberately doing it by myself, which I've never taken a solo trip to Europe before, and I'm super jazzed about it. But I mean, there's both, and I don't know. It has totally changed. It's totally changed my approach to everything, because no matter what's going on in like the more trivial matters of my everyday life, I always have something I'm working on. And it's almost like training for a marathon all the time, except the marathon you're training for is being alive, if that makes sense. Or doing what feels like being alive to you. I mean, that's different for everybody.
I love that. I feel like that was just a huge mic drop.
Oh,
That
really?
was, yeah, no, that was so good. I mean, I love that. And I think especially like this time of year, right? As you wrap up a year and step into a new one, I think a lot of people are thinking about goals and resolutions and things like that. But I have this theory that we're all thinking far too small, because we think we have these limits, or we get an idea and immediately start telling ourselves a story about it of like, oh, I could never do that, or that'd be really hard, or that's not for me. What kind of person does that? I'm not the person that does that. And I think we tamp things down so quickly the minute we get an idea, instead of going, but think of how amazing that would be. I think, and I think part of that is being in hustle culture and being so productivity obsessed that we can't really justify doing something unless it has something to do with our productivity. But I
Yeah.
love the idea of doing it for the sake of wonder and awe is beautiful.
Well, and the other thing is it does help your productivity. I mean, I'm writing a book. I'm about to sell a book.
Fair. Yeah.
Right. I have 11 different copy editing jobs right now. I've met so many different people as a result of having to shift my life. I'm far more successful than I was before. And I thought I was doing okay back then. And I'm doing it in a way that is authentic and that is real for me. And that is the things that I believe I'm here to do. It's not me just, please show me what I'm good at, or please let me live up to this title that I have. I think people get imposter syndrome a lot these days, because it's just like, things are going well for you and you remember a time when they weren't going so well. So you're just constantly afraid like you're going to lose it. And then you just want to like, dot all the I's and whatever, just so you can keep that thing. And, okay, the best way I can explain it is this, and I'm going to try to make this brief. In the middle of the first year, and I had already learned about this a little bit back when I was a TV recapper, but I kept seeing horseshoes everywhere. And when I was a TV recapper for Mad Men, they had this symbol of the horseshoe on the show. And they explained when I was writing about it, I learned online there's two different positions for the horseshoe that are considered lucky. And one position is the U shape. And the theory of that is so your luck doesn't spill out. And then the other position is the arch shape. And the saying that goes with that is let luck rain down upon you. And it's really two different, like vastly different philosophies about luck. And of course, one is more popular in the West and one is more popular in the East, because that's how those things go. But when I learned about that, it's like it occurred to me like, oh, okay, that U shape is kind of conservative. It's almost like what I've always been taught, that if something's going really well and I'm feeling successful in my life, man, I better hold on tight to those things that are going well. And like what you were just saying, that can also include ideas about what you think is possible. And as you're holding on to what you have, either because you're afraid the other guy is going to steal it from you or it's going to spill out. And you might even like, let's say you start with a small U-shaped horseshoe and then it grows larger because, okay, now you're doing better and you have more stuff or you have more experiences. You're still the U-shape, you're still embracing that philosophy. So you're technically not allowing a whole lot in. You're not open to like new things happening. And when I started thinking about it that way, and I realized like, well, my dad kind of lived more like the arch shape because he was always open to new things happening and he was always present. And he also kind of never seemed to like hang on to anything for very long. But if you're living that way in the arch shape, you're also sort of saying, okay, I accept that I'm always going to be provided for, that luck is always going to rain down upon me. but I'm also required in this position to be giving to other people. Like if I shift my way of living from I'm just going to try to get all of that I can to I'm just going to try to give all that I can, just with this belief that when you're born, you already have everything you need. Like there's nothing I could possibly quote unquote get in this life that's going to make me feel whole or complete. I mean, it's scary. That's a fucking scary way to live, because it's like, okay, I'm going to let go of everything I identify with that I think makes me me and that I think is my luck, but new luck's going to come. So it's sort of like that's how I look at it now, that if I maintain this attitude of openness and faith, that as long as I keep being this vehicle of love to other people, I'm going to keep being replenished with it, then everything's gravy. Does that make sense? It's a long walk. I'm sorry.
No, it's a beautiful one, because the U-shaped horseshoe is kind of the idea of grasping, that if you're so busy grasping to something, you can't grab anything new. You're telling your subconscious mind, there is a limited supply of this. I have just this one adventure, just this one moment, just this one job or dollar or whatever that is, instead of I'm just going to be open to possibilities here. And I think we cut ourselves off with ideas in that way. I think we cut ourselves off with our approach to so many things, because even like the journey of an experience, sometimes we say, okay, I have this goal. I want to do X, Y, Z. The way to do that is this. And we put these blinders on and we say, like, the only way to do this one thing is this. A great example of that I was just interested to read about was this woman who started trading items with the goal of trading up to a house. She started with a hairpin.
Yeah, I love that. I saw that the other day. Yeah.
It's a fascinating story. And she got her house. She ended up getting a house eventually. And she made all these interesting trades. And conventional wisdom would be like, I want a house, therefore I have to save money, get a down payment, do this. I got to do the following things. And I love the idea of there's not just one way. If I'm open enough, I can find lots and lots of ways to do things. And I feel like that approaching that way is such a superpower.
Yeah. And it's quite a ride. That's for sure. I mean, that's what I value. I just value the journey. I mean, people get very attached to outcomes, and it's just like, no, man, it's the experience of living. And you touched on something before I wanted to comment on really quick. You had said how when you get an idea, something starts telling you, oh, that's too hard, or that will never happen, or, or even worse, like, who do I think I am that I could do that thing? And I think what you have to learn how to develop, I really think it's a skill. It takes practice. And because I've had to learn how to do this, because I was a very anxious person before I started this project. You have to learn how to tell the difference between what your heart and gut are telling you and what your brain is telling you. Like, is this a gremlin that's keeping me up at night and saying, doubting me? Or is my heart, I think you, a few years back, you had that jar where it was like the hell yeah jar.
Yeah, the hell yeah jar.
Yeah. I mean, that was so like motivating to me, because I was like, yeah, like, you need to start saying yes to things in your life. Like, stop, saying no to stuff. And I mean, immediately if something is right for you.
If it's a hell yes. Right, there's that expression, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of truth to it. We're not just these like human bodies walking around. We're spiritual people, and spirits are connected to one another, and spirits are connected to the universe. And we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or in 10 years, but part of us sort of knows. It's like something's happening. You're like, oh, I deja vu. I thought this would happen. It's not always shocking. I think if you tap into that part of you, that spiritual part that's like, this is right, this feels so right, you have to listen to that. But at the same time, what I've learned, because I used to think, oh, everything that's a gut feeling I need to go for. But at the same time, you also have to understand, if you start getting ideas about it, like, oh, this doesn't seem easy enough, or this is, I don't know if I'm the right person for it. It's also important to remember that you don't have the knowledge yet that thing requires. And once you have that knowledge, you'll understand that it is not at all what you thought it was going to be. And that you are working with very limited knowledge actually about what the thing is. I mean, that has been like mind blowing to me, because, as a magazine journalist, it's just like, well, I know a little bit about everything. Like, I think I know how surfing is going to go. I had no idea how surfing was going to go. Surfing was miserably difficult. Like, I did it maybe 20 times. Finally, I got my both feet on the board for, I don't know, like 5 seconds. But it didn't really matter that I had failed so badly at it for so long, because God, I actually did it at the end. And it was incredible. It was really just like having to keep going back into that ocean with that heavy board, which was heavy for me. It didn't seem heavy to anybody else, but it was heavy for me. And just persisting and going and going. It's like, after a while, you stop fighting it the same way. And you just feel like one with nature, as corny as that sounds. You just feel like, well, okay, the ocean is the boss and I'm just its minion. And that's a really, really helpful experience to have in life, because I think especially these days, it's very easy to just sit back and like look at your phone and feel like, oh, I got everything I need. I know how everything works. And you have to go out and have these humbling experiences to truly know like what you're made of, you know. And I felt that way with the half Ironman too. I mean, I didn't finish my first one, but the fact that I learned that on a blazing hot highway where I needed water, couldn't get enough of it, had 3 cops on motorcycles behind me every few minutes asking me if I'm okay, you know, not knowing if I'm going to make it, if I have to get to the run portion after this bike. The fact that something in me was like, they don't think I can do this. I'm going to show them, I'm going to do this. That is extremely valuable that I had that experience. And had I not trained for 8 months and taught myself how to do these things, I wouldn't have had it. And that is now going to like affect everything I do for the rest of my life.
So much here. I wish we had hours more to unpack every single thing on this list, because they're all so interesting. And I've enjoyed following along on Instagram, and always enjoy hearing your take and hearing what happened behind the scenes. Again, Instagram, it's called My Father's List. Go to it, follow along, support, show love. And gosh, how many are left?
12.
12 are left. Okay.
Yeah, but a lot of them are, like I said, things I've been working on for a long time.
Yeah. I feel like everyone needs to go to Instagram right now and follow along My Father's List. And if you have anything to do with any of those things, I need you to speak up. I need you to say so and jump in and be part of this pool of people that have joined your journey.
I could use some help with the wine list items, actually. I didn't mention
the
those.
wine list.
Yeah, so there's 2 list items that are about wine. My dad was a kind of a wine connoisseur. He sold it for a little while. One of them is own a cellar of fine wines, and one is teach a class about wine. And I really don't have those 2 nailed down yet. So if anybody has any ideas about that.
Interesting. My brain's going to go to work on that one for you about the wine people that I know. Well, thank you so much. This is so lovely. Thank you for stopping by and having this conversation and sharing about this incredible thing that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always honored to talk to you.